welcome to Now and Xen. Today we have Alyssa Aska, computer musician and composer. So thank you for joining us, Alyssa.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, of course. I guess the first question I want to ask you is how did you get interested in computer music?
Originally, I wanted to compose for video games. So actually, that's more or less how I got into it. But also, I did like producing of my own pop music when I was a teenager. So I was working with like technological tools back then as well. And I think then I just took computer music classes because at some point I thought, well, if I want to do this, I need to network. And so I just signed up for some classes and then I ended up doing a degree in computer music.
Are there certain programs you use as a computer music composer that you favor?
I think primarily, like a lot of people also say this, but Max MSP is the most common one, I think. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of the go-to.
My guess is you would probably use Max MSP in like some of your compositions for fixed media.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Fixed media for like audio processing and things or live, anything with live electronics. I generally use Max. I actually learned Kima. So when I
Oh,
started, I actually learned using Kima, which but unfortunately it has a very high price point. So once I was not at the institution anymore, it became like difficult to use that. But I would say like that is a extremely good system for doing those kinds of things. But Max is of course has gotten even better since I first started. So it has a lot of like options and opportunity. Kima was developed by Carlos Scaletti and I can't remember the other in Illinois, and they developed this, and it's basically audio. It's for like processing all kinds of audio, building synthesis, um, but it requires an external device to run. And those external devices is where is the high price point because it's about 5,000. At least when I was working with it, that was the price. I have no idea what it is today, but it had extremely good quality of sound at that. And at that time, I think Max wasn't. It didn't. Gen was not in existence, so a lot of things in Max weren't quite on the same processing level. And I think even like some films used Kima actually for their sound design. So
I guess I had heard about it in the past, but I didn't know that the extra device was so expensive. Like that, I was just talking about how Ableton was expensive with someone the other day because it's like 1,000 or something, and this thing's 5,000. Better be pretty
exactly,
capable.
exactly.
Wowee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I don't know, maybe now it's cheap and easy to access because technology is different now, but at the time that's why I ended up migrating to Max. Because I just as a student, this is not so easy to obtain.
So I wonder if if it's really powerful, and so it requires that hardware to run more effectively because maybe a computer's hard drive couldn't handle it.
I think so. And I mean, maybe now it's different. Maybe the hardware is a different situation, or maybe it's cheaper because, of course, computers are much more powerful now. But yeah, for sure, then it was a separate, you would put it on a rack with everything else and it was separate.
Would you say, working with computer music programs like Max and Kima, would you say those helped you start microtonal composition, or did your interest in microtonality come from elsewhere?
I think in general, anyone that is working in computer music, because you have to, is really focused with the physics of sound. I think generally it lends itself more towards this kind of processes because you already have this idea, like everything is sort of connected with the natural properties of sound, harmonic series, spectral analysis. And so I think naturally you start to question like equal temperament intonation. I think on the other hand, it's also there's the aspect of it where you can be so precise in computer music. And I think so you have already this door open that you have a different understanding of tuning because you have an understanding of like the how spectrum work and that the way we tune things isn't really synchronous with the natural sound. So I think when you couple that with the fact that you can use extreme precision and often you're using ratios and things, I think naturally lends itself to starting to open the door and work more with microtonality or other intonations.
Those are two really great points about computer music. It definitely seems that in some processes where you write fixed media music, perhaps the operations you're doing with the max objects, um, if you're not thinking about trying to force it into 12 tone equal temperament, it'll naturally gain some microtonal qualities just based on how you might multiply things and move things around that are sort of, they could be like artifacts of the process in a sense. And then I think that feels different than trying to create an alternative tuning system on purpose.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in realizing microtonal works that have quite a bit of precision? Because I also noticed that, you compose a lot for piano and organ. So it seems to me that you're very much in that lane of wanting it to be really on.
It's funny because actually, no, not at all. um, but I mean, there's two answers to that because I can explain the piano and organ thing, but also the thing find fascinating is how each performance kind of unlocks something unique with microtonality specifically and intonation. And working with acoustic instruments specifically, I was always very interested in what qualities that instrument, because of the way you're performing on it, brought out. And so, for example, I have works for string quartet that are using microtonality, and it seems like if you look at the score, it seems like what I'm looking for is extreme precision, but I'm actually writing it with the understanding that even to the same pitch on two different strings will have a slightly different intonation and quality. And so I think in those situations, I'm actually looking for that imprecision, that fragility, and that lack of preciseness. And I think the same with wind instruments, other things where it's almost like you look for the intonation and it's something you strive for, but the fact that it's not precise is part of the concept. With the keyboard and organ works, I think this is also, it's like complete opposite of this in that you can of course set the keyboard or the organ to anything, and that's it's a different approach. But I think rather than saying, oh, I think one or the other is better, it's more looking at what can this thing do and how can I like putting my focus on what the instrument is capable of and what it brings out its best qualities.
So, would you say that there is an influence of early music in your work as well? Because I notice several references to like, the oldest music in the world and things like that. How would being influenced by early music affect how you think of intonation?
Yeah, no, that's really good observation because actually I'm really interested in ancient cultures. And so I was also really interested in early music, but I became interested in very, very early music because I'm interested in ancient cultures. And I was always curious what kind of things did they say about intonation? And often in music history, you kind of gloss over a lot of anything to do with really ancient music. Maybe you learn, oh, okay, in ancient Greek music, they had the perfect fifth and everything is based off of that or something. But it's very minimal, at least in my experience. It's kind of you jump immediately to Gregorian chant. You kind of skip over everything elsewhere in the world. It's really kind of focused and like not very much in that regard. And I think it's kind of fascinating because on the one hand, you don't really have much information specifically um, because in music archaeology, there are only so many sources and people kind of argue about it. On the other hand, reading some literature about, for example, ancient Greek tuning systems, there's actually a lot of information that's very specific about the different tetrachords and that they have all these different types of intonations. And within a couple hundred years, they had different ratios and different ways they describe the ratios. And I find that really fascinating because I think we can so easily just say, oh, yeah, they had these three kind of tetrachords, but actually, really, they had multiple kinds of them that were all intonated a little bit differently. I think also what's very interesting is I was reading that although they had this really precise theoretical way of describing it, that the reality of the music that was played might not really have been anywhere near that because how could you get it? So I find that those things also very fascinating. But yes, it's definitely kind of influenced how I think about music, but also kind of using it as an inspiration. And I wouldn't say ever replicating. I don't ever tend to necessarily replicate these things, but more to take it as inspiration and learn from those sources what I can apply to my own things.
I agree completely with you on the point where ancient music is really glossed over. just because I think maybe Western music education might be really focused on harmony, since that's a very important
Yeah.
point to that traditional music. And so you have all these other kinds of music that are really like melodically sophisticated, I think, in some ways, and then they get skipped. Makam music is like that too, right? So probably a lot of early music is engaging in something similar. Like we never talk about like what kind of melodic moves the Gregorian chants would do, and those things are very specific. And it's also interesting, of course, that the Greek music is like people don't know a lot about it. But as you mentioned, you could go through the tetrachords and glean some information. The point you made about how the intonation might be different from what actually happens in practice very much reminds me of Indian music theory and Shruti, and how the just ratios might not line up with what people actually do, but that's like the theoretical reference for like finding notes almost.
I know that we had a gamelan ensemble in my university. I was super fortunate to actually play in a Balinese gamelan.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that's
but it
great.
was so interesting because we all had to compose our own pieces, and so we actually didn't learn any Balinese music until our pieces were already done. Because I
Oh,
think like the professor really wanted us to, not basically replicate and like I guess probably borrow from their music, and he wanted us to have our own experience. It was actually really interesting. I found it very
yeah.
fascinating and to learn about all of that and the all of the rituals surrounding the playing. And then eventually, when you learn about the music, once we'd finished our pieces, then we could dive into the Balinese music, which was really cool. So if you get a chance, definitely do it.
Yes, I'll definitely seize that chance whenever possible. It's great to think about all the cross-cultural pollination that could happen. So you said that your music is not necessarily trying to replicate any of those things, but it's sort of inspired by the
Yeah.
ancient world. Would you say that aesthetically that's true as well? I notice a lot of like maybe I don't know, ambience in your works. That might not be the right word, but it's very slow transformation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think it would be anything intentional of trying to replicate anything. It's probably more the things that I naturally would want to write, and then it comes off kind of that way. I've had people who maybe aren't familiar with, say, contemporary music, kind of say similar things. Oh, this kind of reminds me of early music, or
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I think it's also just the way I like to work with time a little bit. So I kind of usually am working with all kinds of different time structures in my work. And sometimes they're very stretched out, sometimes it's very compressed. So things are really fast, but at the same time, very slow because they're kind of also then stretched in contrast. So I actually think the influence of video game music has had a lot of effect on how I think about form and time in things because I always found it really, really fascinating that you would have to write something for like video game, you have to uh, always be consciously aware of the fact that you're not writing something with a beginning or an end, but that's something that is continuously happening. And so you have
Uh,
to use different strategies to do that. And I found that extremely fascinating because I actually taught on video game music a few times at university, wrote a book on it actually, and then I kind of categorized all these different ways of creating this sort of unending time or continuous forever going time. And somehow I find that really applicable to how I work with like even fixed durational pieces because I try and look at them more as like opening a window of time and then closing it rather than something that it starts and has an end. Like, oh,
uh,
you open the window and you look outside and it's there and you close it, you don't see it anymore, but it's still there. And so that's kind of how I imagine all the pieces. Like it's always there. I just open it, look at it, and then put it back.
yeah. That definitely makes me think of Lamont Young, speculating about whether something has beginning or ended, thinking about something that's always there and you just enter it for a second. It's really kind of like existence, I think. Do you compose with melody a lot, or are you mostly concerned with texture? Or is it maybe a mixture of both?
I honestly think it depends on the piece. So really, it depends on like, I know this is like the worst answer ever, but I have it for almost everything. It really depends on the piece. I usually have something there's some intent or something specific about a piece. And usually that's kind of ends up being the focus. And sometimes it's a formal thing, or sometimes like when I'm writing it for, maybe it will be on texture. I mean, I also just for very practical reasons, it will depend on what I'm writing it for. Like if what somebody has commissioned me for, asked me to write the piece for, what I'm doing it for, it will be different. And so if they say, yeah, I would like something that, I'm a singer, I want something kind of melodic, then I would really put this at the foreground. But if, they say I'm really, really interested in this, a long time ago when I was working on kind of my first piece with the instruments and live electronics, because it was sort of this thing where the professor brought the instrumentalists into the studio and we kind of were learning how to work with instrumentalists. And I remember him saying like, yeah, something you should do, one of the first things you should do is you should ask them what they like to play and start to record that and play around with that. And he said, because they will sound the best playing what they like to play, and then your piece will sound the best. Like it will sound its best when you have musicians that are kind of playing what they like to play around what you write, and so it basically brings out the best in everybody. And I think that's something usually when I approach a piece, I kind of think of what it's for and who I'm writing it for, and maybe what the purpose and intent of the situation is. So
Great advice. And it definitely, I think there's some composers that might not want to compromise in that way. The community, I think, has become smaller in a sense, just because, like, there are composers that write for orchestra, and that's really competitive, and it's sort of a different world than writing for small groups of instrumentalists. And I think those small groups can also, like, they can have more experimental setups in nature as well.
true. If they say, yeah, I want an orchestra piece, and you're writing for, this orchestra and this festival where they tend to, program pieces that are more textural, then they would have maybe that expectation. So I think it's really like, yeah, maybe it's a luxury people don't have so much to kind of
Right.
decide. I don't know.
Potentially. Do you use any ancient scales in your microtonal work or ancient tunings?
I mean, that's a good question because I do work with Greek. Well, like I work with fake Greek tetrachords a lot, and I say that because I'm just using the theoretical idea and what has been gleaned from texts that are actually even secondary sources. So I really I'm not a historian. I read it and I see it, and I actually there's some videos I think I have on YouTube where I was just making some EA pieces that show these different scales and just play the different just to kind of hear. And I do work with this a lot. So even in pieces where I don't have such precision, like keyboard music, where I can maybe detune a pitch exactly to what I'm looking for in the tetrachord, I have worked with these quite a lot in just other music when I felt like it has been like kind of called for that. And I would say that's probably the most obvious and clear example. So
I suppose you have perhaps a variety of microtonal tunings that you've used. I've seen some of the piano compositions where you have like one piano detuned from the other piano. Is there a specific approach that you're using with acoustic versus electronic instruments and microtonal scales?
yeah, I mean, in this case, so I wrote a couple pieces for acoustic piano and e-piano, and there's one specifically called I think E.T., where I go through three different tunings of e-piano, and the acoustic piano is the same tuning the whole time, but it's of course equal temperament, right? And
Yeah.
so that was entirely to explore like microtonality as sort of timbral concept because the difference is not so like functionally clear. And so whereas I think with working with like I wrote a also an e-piano piece called, for example, Tune Down, which does work with the tetrachords, and it's kind of continuously detuning until the tetrachords go from sort of this diatonic to enharmonic and over the course of the piece. And this does have a sort of a more functional effect on how the melody sounds. But I think in this case, it's really I was trying to see, where is the border where it becomes just timbral. And so that's where one is tuned to all these like different harmonic series, C, D, and E, throughout the piece where the piano stays the same. But I also play some natural harmonics on the piano. And I do that specifically because they're not precisely in tune. Like they're not
Ah,
precisely in tune. Usually they're a little bit off of like what the tuning exactly would be. And so where the E piano is precisely in tune, even the acoustic piano when it is closer is not in tune. So that was kind of a feature of that, I guess.
imprecise harmonics of the acoustic piano strings maybe come from the inharmonicity as well as the fact that the piano is tuned in stretched octaves then, I believe.
The actual mechanism, I don't know. I only know that I was looking into the piano harmonics, and when I saw the actual intonation, like when it shows actual, it's out of tune. And so I thought,
Hmm.
oh, okay, this is kind of neat. I will use this. And um, but there's this great website called, I think, pianoharmonics.com that probably they go into detail about the why. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting and kind of a neat way to explore this particular aspect.
So then you're using the E piano and you're not only using it to play along with a standard equal tempered piano and have it be detuned, but you're also changing the E piano's tuning over time
Hmm.
in the piece. So, what's
Yeah.
the setup for that for the piano player? Like, what would they do to change their tuning?
It's a max patch. So there's two ways you could do it is like there could be a pedal, but in this case, we did have people that could just change the tuning to max. And so there's this max software designed by Martin Ritter.
Mhm.
We have this sort of like actually probably organon group. This is me, Martin Ritter, Pablo Marina, and Klaus Lang, and we've actually put on a symposium. And so one of the things that we demonstrated was this microtonal e-piano software, and basically can retune a piano to anything. And because most of us do have some background in computer music, we're also playing around in Max with different ways you could change the tuning dynamically. So there's actually a lot of really interesting pieces for e-piano on our YouTube that people might be interested in. Um, but yeah, basically in this case, it was just, I think someone actually just clicked and changed the tuning on the max patch, but it would be quite easy to implement just pedal that they could switch whenever.
Yeah, a pedal is really nice. I think there's something to be said for constantly having to play electronic instruments on a computer, and that always works fine, but it's nice to also maybe have the instrument in front of you and be able to play that. I was talking on a previous episode about how Infinitone software, for example, like lets you use a key trigger on the piano so that you can like press one like obscure low key that you don't use in the piece and then it will change the whole tuning. And a pedal
Yeah.
seems great too, because then you're really not having to like turn and deal with a computer, but you're just at the instrument and you can just press a pedal. I've seen lots of people do that in Max pieces, so that seems to be a common move.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you mentioned the one where you press an obscure key, because actually there is a piece, I think, by Martin Ritter for one of our symposium where he had different, like just keys that existed on the piano programmed to change the tuning in the piece. And so you would
Yeah.
just push the key of the piano and it would change the whole tuning of the piano. So
You were talking the other day about being interested in different piano layouts. So I wonder if maybe we could have some insight into some of the research you've done there, or what kind of rabbit holes you've gone down in terms of alternative piano layouts.
yeah, I mean, so we have like we developed this two things that we presented at our symposium. Um, One is, of course, this e-piano software. The
Hmm.
other is that we collectively designed an attachment for an e-organ that adds 5 extra keys per octave. And this was kind of designed because actually Klaus asked us if it would be possible to create a situation in which an organ could, an existing organ, because he had an e-organ, could be made to play split keys without needing to buy an extra keyboard setup, basically. Is there a way I can attach something to my keyboard so that, for, like, he asked us originally that, I could kind of pick, is this sharp going to be a sharp or a flat, like so that it was in harmonic. And it kind of blew up into us designing this whole like customizable 3D printed thing that you could put on a keyboard. And the reason that I say specifically what's interesting to me about the layout is I find it interesting the borderline between when for example, when you're working with a detuning software, when the perceptibility of sound is too much that it interferes with the performance practice. And then also when you're working with adding keys, at what point does too many split keys become a different performance practice than what you're used to? And so, for example, in the symposium, we worked with a pianist who then played all these pieces, which had varying degrees of insane microtonality, up to the point that I think one piece even had like 2000 EDO or something, where every key would almost sound the same. And orally, that is crazy. And then with the keyboard extension, we worked not only with an organist and then also with Klaus, who is familiar with split key, but also a pianist who really hadn't performed early music and kind of had to navigate this. And is really interesting because I think that there's this threshold where when you add too many keys, like as soon as you add such number of keys, then it becomes that your like existing keyboard performance practice will start not becoming enough to gather it. And so that aspect I'm really interested in is, where are those boundaries of, when is it orally like just completely messing with you, and how many keys is too much. And
Yes.
yeah.
I think that's a very poignant issue. I know also that in my personal experience playing keyboards, um, I've generated split key layouts, but oftentimes they're rearranging the physical keys of the keyboard around. And so that would mean that, like, if I'm playing in, say, 17 tone equal temperament, and I just have two black keys for where every one normally is, well, that stretches the entire keyboard really wide. And so I think that feels completely different than a situation where, say, you have a normal 12 tone layout, but you'd have something historical where, like, maybe there's two split key layouts, so you could play mean tone temperament, essentially having like 14 or so unequal keys per octave. And, it's also more ergonomic if the keyboard itself is able to cram those split keys into a smaller space, of course. So I'm thinking, like those the 31 tone keyboard that is played by like Studio 31 still has all the
Mhm.
white keys like reachable under one hand, and there's the black keys that are on different ranks, and that's also another kind of situation. Yeah, I think there's also something to be said for like the familiar shapes too. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
if you have a large amount of black keys in one area, it's hard to maybe figure out like which black key you're on. So I find when
Mhm.
you have maybe like seven black keys, that becomes a little bit tricky. But as long as you have a shape that's similar, I think, to the two black keys and three black keys, and you can kind of work around that, that might be the most helpful thing because that plays into your sense of like what you've already experienced before.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of what the, I mean, of course, the basic version of the Fresco Valley Squared, which we designed, is just adding exactly to those the existing black keys, just adds one note above. I think that's very similar to the Studio 31. It's just that there are two keyboard setups, basically. It's like an arcicembalo where you have the dual. But I mean, of course, like for the circumstance they were using the arcicembalo, this made sense because they were looking for very specific things. So I think, like to that extent, I mean, that's kind of what I was looking for. Was very interesting is that so far the most difficult and complicated performance practice in working with these keyboards was not at all having to do with the intonation, but having to do with a new, like using the pedal for a timbre effect. And that was kind of the thing that threw the most. Is I did a piece where I, because I wanted to keep maybe exploring more aspects of what you could do with this MIDI piano, and I wrote a piece for acoustic piano and electronic piano, where the pedal release would kind of activate an envelope so that you would take away the attack, and it would create this more sort of that kind of effect where it's like a resonance or a fade, an afterglow. And it sounds so simple. And like when you think about it, like it seems so simple. Okay, you put the pedal down, you push the keys, and then you lift it up. But of course, if you push the keys with the pedal down, it is actually really messing with your head, because you actually have to anticipate how loud it's going to be before you actually hear how loud it is. And so I think in that regard, it was a very complicated performance practice technique, a really interesting one, like that, maybe if we keep working with this, these kinds of things could be developed and kind of codified. But I thought that was kind of interesting, considering you worry so much about, okay, well, if I have, 500 EDO, it's going to sound really strange and be weird, but which it is. I mean, the pianist, of course, we talked about these kinds of things, but it's interesting that something that actually seems like it's so logical and simple, is from that performance perspective, so like unique and different and unusual.
Almost any little thing can really throw you off. It makes me think with the electric pianos that you could almost, I don't know if you have any pieces where you've taken the electric piano and you've kind of made it like a synthesizer, or if you sort of stuck to electric piano, but maybe in your works for organ you've explored timbre in that way. So I don't know if you could speak to that. Um,
Yeah. The piano so far, we haven't really used it so much as a synthesizer yet. With the organ, a little bit more so, just because there's more like just playing around at home with the, I have, we have this, we're using this e organ for the project, and I was doing some other work with control, like how to continuously control like a, because of course the one aspect of the organ is that you turn a key on and it stays on, and it aside from actually modulating volume or something, the actual volume of a key in regular organ, it doesn't really change. And there's no envelope control in the sense that we're necessarily familiar with. And so I was exploring, one, how to control volume and also how to control intonation. And so with the organ at home, I was exploring that using gestural control and other things. And so, I mean, that's something I'm also very interested in. And that's maybe more on the synthesizer aspect, because it's sort of like hacking the sound and making it do something it wouldn't necessarily do, and seeing what kinds of sort of timbral and textural effects you can generate just by adjusting this. So that is something I'm interested in. But in terms of, say, like just, putting a different sound on the piano, nobody's just done it yet. I think we wouldn't be opposed to it, but nobody has asked for it. So we just didn't do it yet.
so I wonder also at the symposium what kind of, maybe if there's split key layouts that you used, or if there was any keyboard modification. You of course mentioned the organ, but I'd love to know if there's anything you did on the piano that maybe was different than a 12 tone equal tempered layout or anything. Yeah.
No, with the piano, so basically the concept was there were two things. The piano and the layout stayed the same the whole time. It was never changed because it's just a standard piano, but the notes themselves were retuned.
Hmm.
So they were just retuned. So for example, if you retuned it to some crazy high EDO, then maybe the bottom note and the top note would be like an octave apart or something, or
All
less.
right. Yeah.
But with the organ, it was just that was where we added 5 keys per octave, one extra key on top of every black key, so that we get that extended mean tone, full enharmonic setup.
Oh, and so that's the situation where the modification you've made to the organ is like changing the intonation of one of the ranks of it, essentially.
Yes, it's basically, so I think in the regular mean tone, there's 3 sharps and 2 flats. And so what we did is we just added the 3 missing flats and the 2 missing sharps, so that you
Yeah.
can access all of the pure major thirds.
Oh, okay. Yes. Which organ pieces of yours would have that mean tone tuning in it?
The one that I have that has the mean tone tuning, I think, is Tune Up. And then there's also nu-iti, I think. Both of them are for enharmonic organ and e-piano.
So, tune-up seems like it might be a convergence of several different ideas. I was looking a little bit at the tuning information, but I don't think I gleaned all of it. So, are you saying that tune-up has, in the organ, mean tone temperament, and then also, I might be remembering this incorrectly, but did you also say that the e-piano used diatonic to enharmonic? Are those referencing the Greek diatonic, chromatic, and enharmonic scales?
No, sorry, it's Tune Down that uses the Greek and the Greek scales. Tune Up is just basically is taking, it's starting with regular mean tone, so quarter comma mean tone, so that some pitches are in tune with some of the pitches of the organ, but by the end of the piece, every single pitch is pitched up 41 cents, so that it matches up with some of the new additions to the organ. So it's kind of like gradually the piece. So you have this, like, the E piano is moving slowly up, but the enharmonic organ stays the same.
And the names do actually reference how the pitch moves over time. So, like, tune up, gradually the pitch moves up, and tune down, the
Yep.
pitch gradually moves down. How do you think about pitch drifting through time in relation to your earlier philosophy about video game music and, seeing that you enter music at a certain time and leave it at another time.
Oh, that's really interesting. I had never thought about that, but that's no, it's, I mean, it's an interesting concept. And I guess it's like similar to any other process. And I would see it similar to any other process in music, if it goes in sort of a linear way. And I think some processes, you know, over time, maybe a piece that gets louder, I would look at it in the same way as a piece that started very quiet and ended very loud. If it started in one tuning and kind of moved to another, that's sort of a linear um, process. I could also see a situation in which I start tuning it up and then tune it back down, and that's more of like this curve shape. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question, um,
I think so.
but I would, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Where do you use the enharmonic scale and tune down, if you remember?
Oh, you mean the enharmonic tetrachords?
Yes.
Oh, that's a very good question because um I think there are like six or seven processes of um tuning the notes down. And I think this is a little bit more, it's actually very complicated for me to say exactly how, um, in terms of, oh, this is the chromatic, this is the diatonic, this is the enharmonic. Because what
Right.
happens is I start with the two adjacent tetrachords that are disjunct. So there are two
Yes.
tetrachords with each a quarter, perfect fourth, and they're separated by a major second. And I think the two second pitches of each tetrachord are continuously tuned down gradually throughout the piece. And so probably the enharmonic is like the last one because it's tuned down by so much that it's closest. But if I remember right, there should be like two kind of enharmonic because one is like almost enharmonic, but one pitch is still in the chromatic tuning or something. So it's a little
Oh,
bit more complicated than that. But I think by the end, it gets to the enharmonic.
yeah, I see that there's six tunings there, and they're marked in the score. And so the score for tune down then is a scordatura, right? Where you like we're seeing what the piano player is playing physically with the notes on their piano, but we're not seeing the tuning information on the score.
Precisely.
Do
Yeah.
you have a particular approach to detuning? Because you get a lot of these really nice sonorities where you have notes playing together and they're detuned between the instruments, and it seems like you're very fond of having one note and then having a microtone above it playing together, which is a simplification, but you know, like you can build things from that.
Yeah, I guess that would probably be related to the pieces that I did that were kind of had this sort of focus on the timbral aspect of the microtonality. And so I think it's whether I approach it from kind of a functional or more of like a timbral perspective. And in some cases, like I would say in like tune down is very functional.
Right.
Like it's clear like that there is some trajectory with the melodic structure and it has this more clear function. But in something like ET, where you have, like you said, the perfect major third sounding in the E piano, where in the piano is like this equal temperament major third. I think that's a situation where I'm really looking for this timbre quality and a little bit like this beatings and just that it's a different sound because it actually sounds completely different when you play just the dyad on one or just the dyad on the other versus on both. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. I was also just talking to someone about how if you have an acoustic piano and an electronic piano, they don't tune to each other exactly the same. And so it's so fascinating to think about how you've combined those in performance and where you can continue to go with that as well.
It's also funny. I think I've known a performer who said that actually the best situation and only situation for the E piano is playing with the piano because then they have the support of the piano to like because
Yeah,
the E piano doesn't quite have the same fullness or resonance about it, I think. So yeah.
truly. Yeah. The velocity sensitivity, I think also just on an
Yeah.
acoustic piano is always just a little bit better and you can just get more expressive with that and that kind of thing.
I don't know if you have any other questions, but if you feel like I hopefully answered everything
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Yeah, I think this was great.
I guess the best thing to promote is we have a call for scores and a call for abstracts specifically for this year with
Yeah.
the deadline of September 15th. And I would love to, if it's possible to share the link, I would love to do that because I
Yeah.
know maybe some people here would be super interested too. This year is a focus on Oregon because we've moved locations. It's in Vienna. And there you can definitely write for the Enharmonic, the expanded mean tone organ, and also some of the other organs that are there. And we'd be happy to accept abstract submissions and also pieces. We'd love to hear.
Yes, that's such a great opportunity. What's the official name of the call for scores?
It's Enharmonic Interfaces and Controllers, special edition, expanding the organ. Actually, it's a really good opportunity, and yeah.
Hopefully we'll get some submissions in. Sounds great. So thanks again, Alyssa, and
Thank you.
See you later.
Yeah, see you. Enjoy.
Yes.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. You're welcome.